May 2nd, 1945. Berlin. The smell of smoke and death permeates the air. Among the rubble of the Reich Chancellery, a young Soviet soldier descends concrete stairs plunged into absolute darkness. Private Mikhail Petrov, 19 years old, from the small village of Poltava in devastated Ukraine. His hands tremble, not from fear of war, but from something different, a sensation he cannot name. The flickering flame of the candle in his hand casts dancing shadows on the concrete walls. 8.5 meters below Berlin's ground, he is about to enter the most secret and protected place in the entire Third Reich. A place that cost millions of marks to build. A place Hitler considered impenetrable. What Petrov would find in the next few hours would not only change his life forever, it would shape his perception of human nature. This is the real story, based on declassified documents and testimonies from Soviet soldiers about what they found in the Führerbunker, and why Stalin did everything to hide these discoveries from the world for decades. To understand what happened in that bunker, we need to go back 48 hours in time. April 30th, 1945, 3:30 p.m. Hitler places a Walther PPK pistol to his right temple and pulls the trigger. Eva Braun bites a cyanide capsule. Within seconds, both are dead on the sofa in Hitler's private study, 8 meters below the surface. But above ground, the Battle of Berlin still rages with total intensity. The Red Army soldiers, who had marched 2,000 kilometers from Stalingrad, didn't know that their 4-year obsession had ended minutes before. To them, Adolf Hitler, the man who ordered the extermination of entire villages, who turned their homes to ash, who killed 27 million of their countrymen, was still breathing, and they wouldn't stop until they found him. Private Boris Polivoy, war correspondent for Pravda, wrote in those days, "Every Soviet soldier carried the same obsessive question in his chest. Where is Hitler? It wasn't enough to win the war. We needed to look into the monster's eyes."
May 2nd, 9 a.m. The 3rd Shock Division of the Red Army breaks through the last defenses of the Reich Chancellery. Among the rubble of marble and twisted steel, soldiers discover something unusual, an entrance protected by a 3-ton armored door, partially destroyed by explosives. Private Mikhail Petrov, who had lost 2 brothers in the siege of Leningrad, was assigned to lead the 1st Reconnaissance Squad. His superiors chose him for a specific reason. He spoke basic German, learned from prisoners of war. Accompanied by Sergeant Ivan Klemenko and Private Dmitry Malkov, Petrov descended the 18 steps of reinforced concrete that led to the underground complex. Years later, in a 1992 interview with Russian historians, Petrov would describe that moment with details that haunted him for decades. The 6-inch thick steel door was twisted like crumpled paper. Someone had used explosives to destroy it from the inside, as if they wanted to prevent something from getting out, not in. Behind it, stairs descending into absolute darkness. The smell, dear God, the smell was a mixture of recent death, sweated fear, and something chemical, sickening, that stuck in your throat. At the bottom of the bunker, a solitary figure awaited them. Johannes Henschel, 45 years old, master electrician of the complex. A slight man with broken glasses who had spent the last 3 days alone underground, keeping the generators running out of pure professional instinct. Everyone else, officers, secretaries, SS guards, had fled, killed themselves, or disappeared in the last 72 chaotic hours. When he saw the Soviet flashlights, Henschel raised his trembling hands and whispered in German broken by terror, "Nicht schießen, the Führer ist tot." "Don't shoot, the Führer is dead." Petrov translated for his comrades. Then the silence that followed was deafening. Klemenko was the first to speak. He's lying. Hitler wouldn't die like a coward. He must be hiding somewhere. But Henschel, desperate to prove his honesty, pointed upward. Garten, Verbrannt, alles verbrannt. The Soviet soldiers looked at each other. Where was the body? Where was the physical evidence? How could they return to their commanders with only the word of a panicked German? Klemenko gave the order that changed history. Search everything, every room, every drawer, every paper. If Hitler is dead, we're going to find the evidence.
With only flickering candles and 2 Soviet field lanterns to light the way, the 3 soldiers entered the most protected underground complex in the Reich. What they saw first left them completely disoriented. The Führerbunker wasn't the Spartan military lair they expected. It was practically an underground palace of 2 floors, with 30 rooms connected by corridors lined with linoleum and lit by electric lamps still functioning thanks to Henschel's generators. Sergeant Klemenko, son of a Stalingrad factory worker, stopped abruptly in the first hall and muttered a blasphemy in Russian. In his official report, he would write, "We expected to find a basic military command post. Instead, we found apartments that would make Moscow's elite envious, Persian carpets that must have cost more than my family earned in 10 years, hand-carved mahogany furniture, oil paintings in golden frames hanging on the walls like it was a museum." But as they advanced through the corridors, something sinister was revealed. The contrast was disturbing. Absolute luxury mixed with signs of total panic. Classified papers, some still bearing the seal Geheime Reichssache, secret Reich matter, were scattered across the marble floor like confetti. Partially burned documents created a trail of ashes leading from Hitler's office to an improvised incinerator in the bathroom. Malkov, who before the war worked as an archivist in Kiev, immediately recognized the historical value of what he was seeing. He began collecting legible fragments, maps of secret bunkers in Argentina, lists of Swiss bank accounts, execution orders signed by Himmler. And then, in Hitler's private study, they found the scene that would haunt them forever. A brown leather sofa, positioned against the gray-painted wall. At first, it looked like just expensive furniture in an elegant room, but when Petrov brought his candle closer, the shadows revealed something that made his stomach turn. Dark stains, already dried, splattered the right arm of the sofa. Stains that formed an unmistakable pattern, the characteristic spray of arterial blood. "Here," Petrov whispered to his companions. "This is where it happened." War correspondent Percy Nauth, who would arrive at the bunker a week later as part of an Allied delegation, would describe the scene more scientifically. A blood-stained sofa located in Hitler's personal study. Forensic evidence suggested that someone had been killed there violently and recently. But in that moment, in the dim candlelight, the 3 Soviet soldiers understood they weren't just exploring an abandoned bunker. They were investigating a crime scene.
May 3rd, 1945. Morning. Second day of systematic search in the complex. The Soviet soldiers had spent the night in the bunker, taking turns to catalog evidence. Klemenko had found Hitler's room. Malkov discovered the radio room still functioning. But Petrov, exploring alone the upper section known as the Führerbunker, made the discovery that would traumatize not only him, but generations of historians. In the main corridor of the upper floor, 6 oak doors led to the Goebbels family quarters. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, had moved to the bunker in the last weeks of the war along with his wife Magda and their 6 children. Petrov opened the first door, expecting to find only empty rooms. Instead, he found 6 small bodies, carefully arranged in their beds, as if they were just sleeping. The children of Joseph and Magda Goebbels. Helga, 12 years old, the eldest, wearing a white cotton dress. Hilda, 11 years old,
hugging a teddy bear. Helmut, 9 years old, the only boy, in his miniature Hitler Youth uniform. Hulda, 8 years old, blonde hair braided by her mother. Hedda, 6 years old, still holding a fairy tale book. Heidi, 4 years old, the youngest, with her thumb in her mouth. All showed the unmistakable mark of cyanide poisoning. Bluish lips, contracted facial expression, the characteristic smell of bitter almonds that still permeated the stuffy air of the room. Lieutenant Alexei Bessonov, division medical officer who was called to examine the bodies, wrote in his official report, "I examined the 6 miners on May 3rd at 2:30 p.m., dead for approximately 72 hours. Cause of death, hydrogen cyanide poisoning administered orally. Evidence suggests they were sedated before poisoned administration. There are no signs of struggle or resistance. Body preservation indicates they were kept in a controlled environment after death." But what most disturbed Bessonov, father of 3 children in Leningrad, weren't the medical aspects. In his personal diary, found decades later, he wrote, "Helga, the eldest, still had dried tears on her face, tears she cried before dying. How can a mother do this? How can a father allow it? I've seen dead soldiers, massacred civilians, unimaginable horrors of this war, but I've never seen anything that so fundamentally questioned my faith in humanity." Petrov, who discovered the bodies, had an even more visceral reaction. In a 1987 interview, he revealed, "I stood in the doorway for what seemed like hours, but must have been only minutes. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Children. Just children. The youngest was the age of my little sister at home. For a moment, I forgot I was in enemy territory. I could only think, what kind of parents do this to their own children?" The discovery of the Goebbels children's bodies marked a psychological turning point for the Soviet soldiers. They had come to Berlin to capture war monsters. Instead, they found evidence of an evil that transcended any concept of conventional warfare. As Klemenko would write years later, "In that moment, we understood we weren't just investigating the end of a political regime. We were witnessing the final result of an ideology that had completely lost any connection to basic humanity."
But the macabre discoveries were just beginning. May 4th, 3rd day of systematic investigation. A team of Soviet specialists had arrived from Moscow. Criminal investigator Major Anatoly Mironov, translator Captain Boris Melnikov, and document specialist Dr. Pavel Sudokatov. As they methodically searched every drawer, every closet, every hiding place in the complex, a sinister pattern emerged, evidence of paranoia that had transformed into meticulous preparation for the end. In the bunker's medical office, they found an arsenal of chemical death, dozens of potassium cyanide ampules, carefully labeled by Dr. Werner Haas, Hitler's personal physician. Each vial contained enough dose to kill an adult in less than 5 minutes. Mironov cataloged the discovery, quote, 43 vials of hydrocyanic acid distributed in different rooms. Hitler had organized a distribution system. Each officer, each secretary, each guard had guaranteed access to poison. It was as if the bunker itself was a machine designed for collective self-destruction. But it was in Hitler's private quarters that they made the most revealing discoveries about the regime's final days. In a secret safe behind a false panel in the wall, they found evidence of desperate escape plans that completely contradicted Hitler's public image as a leader willing to die for the cause. Detailed maps of South America with maritime routes marked in red pencil. False Austrian passports with photos of Hitler without mustache.
blank identity documents stamped with official Argentine seals, and something that shocked even experienced investigators: canvas bags containing 340 bars of pure gold, each weighing 1 kilogram. Melnikov, responsible for document translation, discovered unsent letters to Nazi officers in South America, dated March 1945. Quote, "My dear comrades in Buenos Aires, preparations for Project Phoenix must be accelerated. The Reich may fall, but the idea will survive. Await our arrival between April and May." But perhaps the most psychologically disturbing discovery was found on Hitler's bedside table, a personal diary handwritten in the last 15 days of his life. Dr. Sudoplatov, specialist in graphological analysis, confirmed the authenticity of the handwriting. The entries, written in blue ink on chancellery letterhead, revealed a man completely disconnected from reality, alternating between delusional megalomania and suicidal despair. Some disturbing entries that Melnikov translated for the team. April 14th. "The generals lied to me. They say Berlin is lost, but I see on the maps we still have millions of soldiers. Where are my phantom divisions?" April 18th. "Eva cried again today. She doesn't understand that our death will be glorious. We will be remembered as gods who chose to leave at the height of greatness." April 25th. "Blondie hates me. Even my dog has betrayed me. Maybe Goebbels is right. We must all die together. The children, too. It's more merciful." April 28th. "Today I married Eva. Tomorrow we die." It's strange how eternity can begin in a basement. April 29th, last entry. "The 1,000-year Reich lasted only 12 years, but 12 years of glory are worth more than 1,000 of mediocrity. If I can't have immortality through victory, I'll have it through tragedy." When Melnikov finished reading these passages to the team, the silence in the bunker was absolute. Mironov, veteran of war criminal interrogations, wrote in his confidential report to Moscow, "These are not the words of a defeated political leader. They are the written delusions of a man who had completely lost contact with reality. The question that haunts us is not how Hitler died, but how someone in such a mental state managed to control an entire nation for so long."
May 5th, 1945. Stalin's headquarters, Kremlin. An urgent telegram arrived from Berlin. Bunker captured. Hitler allegedly dead by suicide. Bodies burned. Awaiting orders. Stalin's response was immediate and categorical. He summoned NKVD chief Lavrenti Beria and gave an order that would change history. "Bring me Hitler, alive or dead. I need to see with my own eyes that the demon is dead. Until I see the body, Hitler is still alive." But Stalin had motivations far beyond simple revenge. The Soviet leader perfectly understood the power of propaganda. A Hitler dead by suicide would become a martyr for future Nazi movements. A captured and publicly tried Hitler would be a complete Soviet victory. In Berlin, the pressure on the investigators intensified dramatically. In the devastated garden of the Reich Chancellery, among bomb craters and still-smoking rubble, Henschel led the Soviet team to a specific depression in the burned ground. "Here," he said, pointing with his trembling finger, "hier haben sie die Körper verbrannt." Here they burned the bodies. The crater was approximately 2 meters in diameter and half a meter deep. The surrounding soil still showed marks of intense burning. The grass had been completely vaporized, and the earth was vitrified by extreme heat. Major Mironov, organized a systematic military excavation. 20 soldiers with shovels began digging methodically, sifting every handful of earth through fine nets. The first discoveries were encouraging. Clearly human bone fragments, charred but identifiable. Pieces of fabric that could have been clothes. Metal fragments that looked like buttons or buckles. But as the excavation progressed, disturbing problems arose. The bones were of different sizes and densities, suggesting more than two bodies. The fabric included fibers that didn't match the clothes Hitler was wearing on the day of his death. And more worrying, some of the bone fragments showed signs of decomposition much more advanced than would be possible in just 5 days. Captain Melnikov, examining the findings, whispered to Mironov, "Either this site was used to burn multiple bodies over time, or someone planted false evidence here." On May 11th, the man Stalin considered his best forensic investigator arrived from Moscow. Dr. Pyotr Semenovsky, veteran of hundreds of homicide cases and specialist in identifying human remains. Semenovsky received direct orders from the Kremlin. Definitively prove that Hitler is dead. Find physical evidence that cannot be questioned. But Stalin didn't want scientific honesty. He wanted a politically useful answer. In a secret meeting at the Kremlin on May 26th, Stalin made a decision that would confuse the world for decades. Beria was present, as well as Vyacheslav Molotov and other members of the inner circle. Stalin pondered aloud. If we announce that Hitler is dead, the Germans will make him a martyr. If we say he's alive, they'll live in fear that he might return. Which option gives us more power? The answer was obvious to a strategist like Stalin. In June 1945, against all the physical evidence his own investigators had collected, Stalin ordered the Soviet Union to publicly announce that Hitler had probably escaped and might still be alive. The soldiers who made the original discoveries in the bunker were transferred to remote posts in Siberia. Some simply disappeared from military records. Henschel, the key witness, was kept in solitary confinement for 10 years. Dr. Semenovsky was forbidden to publish his findings and ordered to destroy his notes. In his personal diary, found after his death in 1978, he wrote, "Stalin asked me to find the truth, but when I found it, he ordered me to bury it. I spent the rest of my career knowing that the biggest investigation of my life was turned into a lie for political reasons."
1991. Collapse of the Soviet Union. State archives open. Documents classified for 46 years finally see the light. For the first time since 1945, the soldiers who discovered Hitler's bunker could speak freely without fear of KGB reprisals. What they revealed shocked historians worldwide. Mikhail Petrov, now 65 years old, retired in a small town in the Urals, was located by investigative journalist Dmitry Volkogonov in 1992. For 3 decades, Petrov had worked as a factory worker in a tractor plant, never mentioning to colleagues or family what he had seen in Berlin. In a recorded interview that was only released in 1995, Petrov revealed for the first time the true psychological impact of that discovery. "I could never forget the smell of that bunker. It wasn't just death, it was something deeper, more rotten. The smell of absolute fear, of madness. Even today, 47 years later, I wake up with nightmares. I dream of those children in their beds, of the blood on the sofa, of the burned documents scattered on the floor like macabre confetti." Petrov paused the interview several times, his hands shaking as he lit cigarettes with arthritic fingers. "My wife never understood why I screamed during sleep. how to explain to her that I saw the place where humanity died. Seeing those dead children changed something fundamental inside me. I lost faith in people's basic goodness. If parents can kill their own children for ideology, what else are we capable of doing? Ivan Klimenko had an even more tragic fate. After being transferred to a military base in Siberia in 1946, he developed what Soviet military doctors called chronic combat neurosis, what we would recognize today as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. In 1993, his daughter, Anna Klimenko, found hundreds of pages of notes her father had written obsessively for decades, trying to process what he saw. We expected to find a conventional war monster. Instead, we found evidence of an evil that transcended any concept of military conflict. It wasn't just Hitler who was dead in that bunker. It was humanity itself. I saw dead soldiers, massacred civilians, entire cities in ruins. But that bunker showed me there's a type of evil that can't be defeated with tanks or artillery. It's an evil that lives inside the human mind. Klimenko never fully recovered. He died in 1987, at 63, from complications related to alcoholism, a desperate attempt to anesthetize memories that had tormented him for 4 decades. Dr. Alexei Bessonov, the medical officer who examined the Goebbels children's bodies, followed a different but equally painful path. After the war, he specialized in pediatrics, dedicating his life to saving children, a form of penance for the small bodies he couldn't save in the bunker. In his last medical article, published in 1989, shortly before his death, Bessonov wrote, "In my medical career, I saved hundreds of children, but I know I did it trying to balance a cosmic scale that can never be balanced. Those 6 children in the bunker taught me that some wounds in the human soul never heal. We just learn to live with the pain." Even Dmitry Malkov, the young archivist who translated the Nazi documents, carried invisible scars. In a 1994 interview, he revealed, "Reading those documents, translating Hitler's final words, seeing the escape plans, showed me how political leadership can completely disintegrate. For years, I couldn't trust any government, any leader. How could I? I saw up close how human minds can become corrupted when they have absolute power." Perhaps the most disturbing testimony came from Johannes Henschel, the German electrician who was kept prisoner by the KGB until 1955. When he was finally released, he revealed details the Soviets had suppressed for a decade. "They wanted me to confirm that Hitler had died in the bunker. But the truth is that no one, not even I who was there, could have absolute certainty. I last saw Hitler on the afternoon of April 29th. On the morning of May 1st, when the Soviets arrived, I had spent almost 24 hours without seeing any of the Nazi leaders. There was smoke, explosions, total confusion. I told the Soviets what I believed to be true, but Stalin wanted certainties that none of us could give." The lasting impact of these experiences was documented in later psychological studies. Dr. Yuri Alexandrov, military psychiatrist who treated several bunker veterans in the 1960s, observed, "These men didn't just suffer from common combat trauma. They witnessed the complete collapse of human civilization in its most intimate and personal form. Seeing world leaders reduced to corpses, children killed by their own parents, evidence of total madness, this breaks something fundamental in the human psyche. Some never recovered."
2009. University of Connecticut, United States. Forensic Genetics Laboratory. Dr. Nick Bellantoni, Connecticut state archaeologist, held in his hands fragments of a skull that had generated worldwide controversy for decades. These were the supposed remains of Adolf Hitler, kept in secret Russian archives since 1946. The DNA test he was about to perform would change the historical narrative forever.
The fragments had been seeded by Russia after years of diplomatic negotiations. Officially, they represented what remained of Hitler's skull after decades of Soviet analysis. In 2000, these fragments were publicly exhibited in Moscow as definitive proof of the dictator's death. But Dr. Bellantoni had serious scientific doubts. The cranial fragments showed characteristics inconsistent with a 56-year-old man, he explained in a later interview. The bone thickness, surface texture, even the coloration suggested something completely different. The DNA test result was devastating for the Soviet narrative. Double X chromosome. The skull unequivocally belonged to a woman between 20 and 40 years of age. But the revelations didn't stop there. In 2012, dentist Hugo Blaschke and his assistant Keith Häusermann, who had treated Hitler's teeth during the war, were located in declassified CIA files. Their original statements, taken in 1945 but kept secret for 67 years, dramatically contradicted Soviet claims. Häusermann had categorically identified Hitler's dental bridge in May 1945, but what she identified did not correspond to the teeth the Soviets subsequently claimed were Hitler's. In an audio recording from 1946, discovered in the National Archives in 2018, Häusermann said clearly, "The Russians showed me teeth, yes, but they weren't the teeth I originally identified. They pressured me to confirm, but as a medical professional, I couldn't lie. The teeth they had in 1946 were different from what I saw in May 1945. The truth began to emerge through multiple converging sources. For 64 years, from 1945 to 2009, the Soviet Union and later Russia had perpetuated a massive historical lie. There was no authentic physical evidence of Hitler's death in Soviet possession. Dr. Anthony Beaver, Cambridge military historian, analyzed the declassified documents and reached a disturbing conclusion. The Soviets probably never found Hitler's true remains. What they presented as evidence over the decades were fragments of other people, possibly young women who died in the bunker or nearby during the final bombardments. But the deepest historical irony was that the soldiers who made the original discoveries knew the truth from day one. Mikhail Petrov, in his final interview before dying in 2003, made a revelation that summarized decades of cover-up. "We never found an intact body of Hitler. We never found definitive physical evidence. What we found were signs of suicide, burned documents, and stories from people who were there. But Moscow wanted physical proof that didn't exist, so they created their own proof." Ivan Klemenko, in his obsessive notes found by his daughter, had written in 1967, "I always knew the fragments we sent to Moscow weren't correct. They were pieces of bones we found scattered throughout the complex. But when Stalin wants something, you give Stalin what he wants, even if you have to make it up." Dr. Semenovsky, in his secret diary revealed in 1978, was even more direct. "I honestly reported that we had no conclusive physical evidence. Stalin responded, 'Then find conclusive physical evidence.' I understood the message. My career depended on producing results, not truths." The Hitler false fragment scandal exposed something much larger than a simple historical lie. It revealed how authoritarian regimes can distort scientific evidence for decades, creating false narratives that become official truth. Even more disturbing, if the Soviets lied about such basic physical evidence, what other Cold War historical truths were equally fabricated? Dr. Richard J. Evans, Cambridge historian specializing in the Third Reich, summarized the impact of the revelations.
The case of Hitler's false remains teaches us that we must question all official narratives, especially those that serve specific political purposes. Historical truth must be based on verifiable scientific evidence, not propagandistic needs.
Berlin, 2025. Gertrude Kolomar Street, corner of Innenministergarten. 80 years after World War II's most shocking discovery, thousands of tourists, residents, and workers pass daily through an apparently ordinary parking lot in the heart of the German capital. Cars park, children run playing, couples walk with dogs. None of them imagine they are walking directly over the ruins of the Führerbunker, 8.5 meters beneath their feet. Only a small informational plaque, installed in 2006 after decades of debate, discreetly marks the location. Most passerby don't even notice it. Those who stop to read find cold, technical text. Approximate location of Hitler's bunker. But behind this deliberate urban normalcy exists a specific historical decision. After German reunification in 1990, Berlin authorities faced a delicate question: how to deal with the city's most infamous location. Transform it into a memorial, museum, or simply erase it? The decision was radical: complete normalization. The site would be treated like any other urban land. Residential apartments were built around it. A public parking lot was installed exactly where the bunker entrance was. The message was clear: this place doesn't deserve reverence, nor horror, just forgetting. But behind that deliberate urban normalcy exists a specific historical decision. After German reunification in 1990, Berlin authorities faced a delicate question: how to deal with the city's most infamous location. Transform it into a memorial, museum, or simply erase it? The decision was radical: complete normalization. The site would be treated like any other urban land. Residential apartments were built around it. A public parking lot was installed exactly where the bunker entrance was. The message was clear: this place doesn't deserve reverence, nor horror, just forgetting. But for the few Soviet soldiers still alive who descended into that darkness in May 1945, that hole in Berlin's ground never became just urban geography, never became just history. Viktor Petrov, Mikhail Petrov's son, revealed in 2018 that his father secretly visited Berlin in 1997, 2 decades after the wall fell. He didn't tell anyone in the family he was going. We only found out when we found plane tickets and photos after his death. He had stood in that parking lot for hours, just staring at the ground. A tourist took a photo of him, an elderly man, alone, crying silently in a Berlin parking lot. Mikhail Petrov, in his last recorded interview before dying in 2003, said words that summarize 8 decades of historical trauma. People ask me what it was like to find Hitler's bunker, what it was like to discover where absolute evil lived its final days. I say, we didn't just find an abandoned bunker. We found hell on earth. And once you've seen hell with your own eyes, it never leaves your mind. Anna Klimenko, Ivan Klimenko's daughter, still maintains the hundreds of pages her father wrote obsessively. In 2020, she donated the manuscripts to the Washington Holocaust Museum. On the last page, written days before his death in 1987, Klimenko had scribbled the final reflection: I survived the most terrible war in human history. I saw Stalingrad, Kursk, the march to Berlin. But that bunker taught me something no battle taught. Evil isn't always obvious. Sometimes it comes disguised as normalcy, as family, as ideology. And when you recognize pure evil, when you look directly at it, a part of you dies along with it. Dr. Sarah Chen, trauma psychology specialist at Columbia University, studied the bunker discoverers' accounts for over a decade. Her conclusion: these men suffered what we call existential trauma. They witnessed events that fundamentally questioned their understanding of human nature. It wasn't just combat PTSD. It was direct confrontation with physical evidence that humans are capable of previously unimaginable evils. Today, of the thousands of Soviet soldiers who participated in the Battle of Berlin, perhaps a dozen are still alive. None of the original bunker discoverers survived beyond 2005, but their words remain, their testimonies, their documented nightmares. And perhaps that's the deepest lesson of Hitler's bunker. It's not the historical monsters we should fear most. It's ordinary humans who choose to follow monsters, families who choose to kill for ideology, societies that choose evil disguised as patriotism. As Petrov wrote in his last letter found after his death, Hitler's bunker wasn't built by demons. It was built by ordinary German engineers. It wasn't operated by mythological monsters. It was operated by secretaries, cooks, technicians, normal people who made extraordinarily evil choices. And perhaps that's why that parking lot in Berlin is actually the perfect memorial. Normal life built literally over the ruins of absolute evil. A daily choice for every person who passes by, between remembering or forgetting, between learning or ignoring, between recognizing humanity's capacity for evil or pretending that monsters like Hitler are aberrations that can never arise again.